Welcome to Conversion Conversations. This is Cameron, and today I have a special guest, my friend Rob, Rob Clark, who has been working and brewing a Shockwave Caliburst deck that came on the channel recently. And a lot of people really liked it and were really interested, so they wanted me to pick your brain about it. So thanks for coming on, Rob.
Thanks for having me.
So we have in front of us, I'm looking at Shock and Awe 1.0, which is 1.0, but definitely not the first version of this deck you built. Can you give just a quick overview of what sparked your interest in you've been working with Shockwave for a while, but then I guess it was Caliburst coming out in Siege 2 that made you dive deep into just seeing how many times you can system reboot someone?
Yeah, uh, I really liked Shockwave, and as soon as I actually got the card out of a box of Wave 1, I was like, oh man, this would be so cool to actually do something with. And I started looking at all this stuff, and I was like, well, system reboot, there we go. That's 4 damage, so gonna put that in.
Mm-hmm.
And then from that point, I just started each wave, like from basically around Wave 2 was when I started in the game, and I pulled that just before Wave 3 came out. So once Wave 3 came out, I started looking at stuff, and it was sort of an idea I had, but it was never practical just because of, like, you can only get system reboots so many times. And then when Caliburst came out and doubled the damage of a system reboot, that's when I was like, oh, well, this just got real. This is happening.
Yeah, so with that goal in mind, I guess a high level view, what is your deck's win condition?
To make them cycle their deck to death. I have as much discard draw as possible. I tend to lean more on the discard cards just because I don't expect Caliburst to survive more than maybe 2 hits. So if I get him past the wheel, then that's all the better. But he also is protected by some meat shields because I have Fix It and Night Flight in there to act as augments. And so he's basically just working with Shockwave to try and get them to system reboot at least once a turn. Because, I mean, if I can get them to reboot 2 times over the course of 2 turns, then I've already done roughly anywhere from 8 to 16 damage or more, depending on how many cards they have in their hand.
Yeah, and I guess let's assume for a second that you system reboot on your first turn. So the 2 cards that are crucial to the engine are Shockwave and Caliburst. Shockwave, you flip him to bot mode, and what is it? When your opponent discards, they choose one of their characters and put a damage on it whenever they discard a card. And then Caliburst says he starts out in bot mode, and his thing is when your opponent draws a card, after their first draw, they have to choose their character and do 1 damage to it. So both of those on the field and a system reboot happening with a hand size, let's say of 3, is 3 damage on the discards for your opponent, and then another 3 damage after they draw 4 cards that they'd have to spread out. And if you can do it multiple times a turn, Caliburst gets more efficient because now the full system reboot is going to be 4 damage. And if they've drawn 4, that's 4 on Shockwave. So doing 2 system reboots like on turn 1 would be, 6 plus 8, 14 damage?
Yep.
And then the nice thing that you have in your deck is obviously Fix It's kind of a part of that engine where as long as you have a white pip in hand and he's not tapped, you get to system reboot at least once.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
that with that much, what's the top and how many times have you been able to system reboot someone in 1 turn? I'm thinking if you brainstorm system reboot and get lucky, there's a Christmas Land chance of doing it 3 times in a turn.
The average is 2 times on my second turn.
Mm-hmm.
Just because by that point I flip Fix It as well.
Yep.
And then I system reboot and then do Fix It for 2. But usually the most I've done, I actually had Brainstorm in hand with System Reboot, and so I brainstormed, rebooted, drew another Brainstorm and Reboot.
Oh,
So I
nice.
brainstormed, rebooted, and then I think I did a disarm on the second half of that second brainstorm and slapped the 3 extra paddings back into their hand, and then tapped Fix It for another reboot, and that wiped out their team.
Oh, nice. Okay, so when it hits, when the combo hits, you're doing. So what was that? 3, and then another one out of 7. So like, yeah, so you can do 30 plus damage. Not often, but it has the potential to get there. And I think that's definitely what the draw is for people, is kind of having as pushing the statistics to the limit to see what you can get away with. I am looking at, like, we're looking at the shock and awe that's current to your or current to what's out right now, wave 4. I guess walk me through the deck list a little bit. Was there a point in time when the deck list you had any survivability stuff, because you are running a good amount of blues, extra paddings or things like that, or because your system rebooting as much as you are there, you saw that there wasn't any value in trying to hold on to those?
Yeah, I think I'm on. Technically, what's on Fort Max is version 7, maybe version 8, is Shock and Awe 1.0. Because I did go through and had like extra padding and later on War of Attrition and stuff, but then I was like, well, I mean, I can't really collect these to hand that easily. Um, so, I mean, it was nice in thought, especially because of Night Flight being able to be a War of Attrition himself and do 3 damage and then heal me for 3.
Mm-hmm.
But I was just like, I mean, if it comes down to me being able to disruptive entrance someone or me getting 1 War of Attrition off, they're the same thing.
Yeah. And we have, like you mentioned, this is version 7. Like, we've personally played, I've played your deck 3 or 4 times now, and I do remember, like, the first couple times, especially when I just was less familiar, like when you get off 2 system reboots in a turn and I got to figure out where to put 14 or 15 damage, that's very intimidating.
Yeah, I think honestly it is weirdly kind of part of it is that it's almost like a mind game with it, because if you can shoot it off on that first turn, then it totally throws a lot of people, because they're like, oh, I was expecting 4 damage, maybe 2 this turn, not 16, not 18.
And you did recently at a competitive event, you took a game against Galaxy Prime that way, I think, right? I don't remember how many times you were able to get the combo off in one turn, but it was like 2 times for 2 consecutive turns or something like that.
Yeah, I believe he went first, I went second, and I think that was a game where I actually started the game with a reboot, or no, I started with a brainstorming hand, drew a reboot, so I did the brainstorm reboot, got another reboot, and then so he had to figure out where to put 16 damage, and then the following turn I was able to play a microcapacitor and tap Fix It for a reboot, and then for my turn I played the system reboot that came up in my hand after that.
Yeah, yeah. So then what, I guess, going through the rest of this list. So the white pips, let's start there, because unless it's system reboot, I feel like their biggest value is being a system reboot with Fix It. Is what other uses are you getting out of your other white pips? So debilitating crystal for one, is there a particular utility you're trying to get rid of there?
Well, that's handy for things like defensive driving,
Mm-hmm.
where it reduces the damage I do by 1, so they just send everything into someone and they never take damage.
Yep. Getting rid of that guy.
And also just for if I attack someone who has any number of like nasty things, or if they're getting ready to, they were foolish enough to, with forethought, put a Energon Axe or something on, because I forced them to think I could get system rebooted at any time, so I need to get these upgrades out of my hands. And so if they put a system reboot on someone, or they put a Energon Axe or something like that on someone that they haven't attacked with yet, I can hit them with the debilitating crystal if they're a target, and then I can send it back.
Yeah, I'm thinking of a nightmare scenario where Galaxy Prime has 3 energy packs on, and they're thinking, oh, I can just have enough health where I don't have to worry about this damage. And then you can get a hit with a debilitating crystal on, put those 3 cards and whatever upgrades they've got back in their hand, and then get the system reboot off on the next turn, and it's just more damage they have to deal with.
It would only be 1 because it returns 1 of the defending characters.
Oh, you're right. You're right.
Yeah, but yeah, exactly. If I can, or even if they just have the 1 because they're like, well, I can get the others later, or if I've forced them to lose their others, then I can always get that off and sometimes get lucky.
And then Field Communicator makes sense. You're looking for particular effects off the top of your deck. In this case, system reboots, brainstorms, maybe some secret actions for survivability. I guess would espionage be something you'd, I guess, try and fishing out something from the hand that could prevent your combo. What about how often do you find that you were playing Dampening Field when you had it in hand, or was that just a system reboot?
It was something. The only time I played it was actually at that little tournament we went to where I went up against the General Prime Airstrike Patrol. I played a Dampening Field, and that's honestly I think the only time I've ever played it.
Gotcha. And then Espionage is an interesting one. Is that it's a fishable white pip, or like I said, are you looking for particular effects to get rid of, like, say, I guess hijack wouldn't super help your opponent. Counter espionage, maybe, now that's going to be a thing?
Yeah, with the espionage, it is a fishable white, so I can pull it to hand if it's a fix-it turn. And if I'm in between turns, I can always do a little sneak there and hit them for at least 1 damage and get rid of something, hopefully.
Yep. And then Fog of War is nice if you somehow don't have a system reboot in hand and Fix-It is already tapped, or whatever unfortunate scenario it is, something that helps get some cards drawn or discarded, either way, putting some damage out. What about Swerve? That's an interesting one to me. The one I think of is Shockwave, I'm assuming is generally the one that you're trying to protect, since he does... no, actually, he's got the same defense in either mode. Is Swerve for Fix-It to try and get stealth if you need him?
It's a combo of, 1, it's a black pip, and I wanted to have at least a couple of black pips so I could maybe punch 1 damage through on my attacks, because they're not going to be punching much damage through on their attacks. And 2, it's a white pip for Fix-It, but also it's something where if I can Swerve Shockwave, he forces them to draw 2 cards on their turn, so if Caliburst is out, they're taking another 2 damage.
Gotcha.
And so maybe that will also help out as far as pinging someone who they want to attack with, or maybe change their minds about, and it gives me 2 extra cards on my turn and 2 extra cards to get rid of from their hand that they can no longer use at that point.
Yep. And then Micro Capacitor absolutely makes sense. Like, if you can get that on before you tap Fix-It, getting extra value out of him is huge. To me, I think more so than getting like the ideal 3 system reboots in 1 turn, if you can get 2 in 2 consecutive turns with Micro Capacitor, that's games that you probably tend to win.
Yeah, the microcapacitors definitely, they've helped quite a bit with Fix-It. I mean, it's something where I'm working on how many to run since it's a blank pip. I have 3 in 1.0, but I'm probably dropping that down to 2. I believe I dropped it down to 2 in the next iteration, just because there were a lot of times where I'd draw 2 of them, or draw 1 and then end up getting another one instead of a white pip, or instead of something else that I could have used a little more.
And I guess before we go to the 2.0, the one that's compatible with the Wave 5 cards that have been revealed so far, is there anything else you wanted to point out with this one, or do you want to talk about a bit about piloting What are some things that you try and keep an eye out for when you're taking this deck out?
Well, one other card that I've actually gotten a fair amount of use with this deck is Collateral Damage, just because it is a vapor. It's a smelt plus a discard. So that has been something I've actually gotten to play a couple times because each player chooses a weapon on one of their characters and scraps it, and then each player chooses a card in hand and scraps it. So, I mean, if I already have other cards in the hand that I don't really need, then I can always dump one without a problem. And the only weapons I'm running in this are the Disruptor Launcher for Shockwave.
Right,
So
and scrapping it is actually advantageous because then you'll get to play it again.
Exactly. But I mean, that's really it. I mean, it's just a matter of trying to get the out. If you don't get the system reboot, that's been the biggest challenge, is really just kind of adapting, because it is sort of difficult to adapt. You really have to kind of switch modes and almost overdraw them. Like, because if something happens, like Fix It is killed somehow in like the second or third turn, or you're just not getting the reboots, you kind of have to go to almost a force them to draw to take damage thing until you can get a reboot, or until you can get something else that will dump stuff out of their hand.
And your line of play is pretty finely tuned here, right? I don't think I've played a game where you don't flip Shockwave turn one. So, or I'm saying every game I've seen you play, you flip Shockwave turn one, swing with Night Flight. Maybe if you're going second, you have an opportunity to, I guess, do you have any general or no, you don't, you actually don't run rapid conversion in this. That one's surprising, to try and get Fix It flipped. Were you running it at any point and you just cut it, or that's just something you weren't really worried about?
It was mostly something I wasn't worried about, because with this, it's kind of like I could run it and I could flip Fix It, but then if I play it, I can't play a microcapacitor, so he's tapped, and then that means I have two guys who are tapped if I attack, and then they can just plow into Fix It to remove him immediately. So I try to give Fix It that extra turn anyway, just to allow him to actually get a chance to have a microcapacitor.
That makes sense. So you want to delay the Fix It turn, hopefully flip Shockwave, system reboot if you're going second, and drawing a microcapacitor, or I guess holding off on a system reboot if you have one in hand, so you can play it before the next one. Yeah, and it's been fun to play against. I definitely think you're playing against your deck was a puzzle I had to solve. At first, I think the first couple times we played, I was playing a couple different blue decks, and it was like, I think at first I didn't understand how to move the damage to where I wanted it to go, to help me win. And going against blue and having someone not care about my defensive flips was super intimidating.
Yeah, that's really the best part of it. Just to watch someone play sparring gear, and I'm like, okay, bro.
Yeah.
You.
Yeah, exactly. I guess before we go on to Wave 5, I know not all the cards have been revealed. I can't remember if all the retro strats have been revealed, but is there, I guess, a character card that you'd like to see that would be an effect that would help augment, or a strat for, because if anyone, I don't think he's getting one, but ideally Shockwave is a Wave 1 card that would love a stratagem to help him out. What sort of effect would you be looking for to play in this deck? You're already at 25 stars, so it would maybe require cutting Night Flight and doing something different. What sort of stratagem would you put in that would make it worth operating without Night Flight and doing something else?
I would have to be like 2 damage instead of 1. It would have to essentially double his damage, because he would, realistically, if I had to take Night Flight out, I would probably just take Fix It out and put a beefier character in there, which means I'm dropping a turn before I can go. So if I go up against something that's like 4 or 5 wide, he's going to take more damage. So I need to be able to get damage quicker.
Oh, that's interesting. So you could play a 7-star. So that's opens up the opportunity. Ooh, that's not bad actually. Titan Master, right, with the tough one head.
Hmm.
A 6-star body, a tough one head that has some decent survivability to it. And then, yeah, being able to play a strat to do the damage. Or for me, like having to play against this, I think the thing that would really screw me over as the opponent would be if there was a stratagem that let you direct damage. So if I didn't get to choose where the damage is and you got to say 14, put it all on Jetfire, something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah, if I could direct the damage, I mean, even if it's just the one ping from, even if it's just the damage from him being
Yeah.
able to direct the damage, that would still be like 3 to 4 damage a turn or more, depending on what I do. I mean, that would also open me up to adding cards back in that I've previously taken out, like Testify. Because
Hmm.
if I can, brainstorm, Testify, and then system reboot, then I get them even more.
Yep. And then the other opportunity I see would just be giving Shockwave more health. At 11 stars, he is unfortunately drastically under health. 11 stars and 11 health. Yeah. So your team right now operates at 32 health. I could see even if they gave like a star for +4 health to put him at 15 or something. I think that would give you some opportunities also. Because then again, you go 3 wide, but you get a beefier Titan Master that maybe has more survivability than Fix It and Night Flight combined, and you've got Shockwave with more survivability.
Yeah, I mean, if I had Shockwave with a little more health, especially now between belligerence, turning off my blues orange and making me paper, or getting like a bunch of Pierce pips or something
Hmm.
thrown at me, I mean, he doesn't hold up. If I have to get lucky and just blow through on that first couple turns with system reboots in order to really survive like a heavy orange deck.
Yeah.
I've done it, but it's it's something where you've really got to get pull the system reboot itself a couple of times.
So let's transition into the Wave 5 version of this deck. Talk me through what's changed.
Well, let's see here. Currently, I have nitro boosters in there just because if I am forced to attack with Fix It, or if I want to attack with a couple people twice on the wheel turn, like I can attack with Caliburst and then untap him. So that gives me a little bit of room there just because everyone except Shockwave can take advantage of it and get untapped.
Oh, that's
So
true. Yeah, I guess that definitely helps Caliber survive and hide behind Night Flight a little longer if possible.
yeah, exactly. If it comes down to having to attack with Fix It or Calibers, I'd rather not either of them attack, because
Hmm.
Night Flight can usually survive one hit, and that way it forces them to take him out on the next turn there.
And then I see you've got Electro Optical Visor.
Yes, that is to make any of my targeting stuff more efficient, because I have had a couple of turns where I had two different options to play, and I was like, well, I could play Disruptive Entrance and make them discard an action, or I could play Checkpoint and make them discard all their upgrades, but I don't know what's in their hand, and I don't have a Brainstorm.
Gotcha.
So,
Okay, interesting. Yeah, yeah. So being able to target checkpoint better to buy yourself more damage in the turns between the system reboots.
yeah, or espionage or even counter espionage, because being able to see their hand, I could make them possibly discard an Autobot card from their hand. So if they have like a Blaster or a Confidence or something, I can get rid of that, and I see their hand, and then I can play an action to get rid of other stuff.
And then yeah, and speaking of counter espionage, you are running two of. And have you had a chance to play this version yet, or is this still in progress while we're waiting on more Wave 5 reveals?
It's still in progress. I'd like to test it out, but I've been playing some other Wave 5 decks that I'm more interested in
Mhm.
testing out right now. So, but yeah, the counter espionage, I think that will be a big help for getting rid of some of those things like belligerence that I'm worried about.
Yeah, and I think it's pretty safe as a two of. That's a pretty safe bet. What else we got in here? Ooh, mission briefing. I actually don't remember what this one does.
That is the one that draws a card for each character you have on the battlefield in bot mode or body mode.
Oh, nice. So eventually, on turn 2+, depending on how long Fix It survives, it's a draw 3. That's fetchable, which is nice. And you
Yeah,
can scrap it as a system reboot if you needed to. So that does seem very strong in this deck.
yeah. I mean, the first turn I go, if I can play an action, it's a pep talk. So after that, it becomes a 3-off. So I mean, it becomes a universal network. I believe is the star card. So I mean, it's honestly in this deck, it's more powerful than that blue star card.
And actually, this is probably something that I should have mentioned about version 1. So you are running 2 vaporizes, and I know there's a lot of talk. Generally, people run reprocess because they can find it and pick it up on flips. But with the way you run your deck, with the number of system reboots, vaporize is a blue pip, and odds are you'll get it in your hand at some point when you need it.
Yeah, and I also have 2 disarms. So between those 3, I'm probably getting one of them, and I have 2 sabotage armaments. So I'm not 100% worried about weapons.
And then the last change for Wave 5 as of the current reveals is the scouting mission, which I love, right? It's do a damage to any character. Great. Here, take a damage. You get to target it. Oh, your owner draws 2 cards. Is Caliber still on the field? Yeah, put another 2 damage out there somewhere.
Well, another 1 damage, because if it's on my turn, it would be...
oh, you're right. You're right. Unless they drew earlier for some other reason.
Yeah, and also if there are any sort of secret actions that let me play an action, obviously,
Yep.
then it becomes a 3 damage card, which those secret actions would immediately go in this deck.
Yeah, I mean, and like I've piloted a version similar to your Wave 1.0 version that you let me grab the deck list from you a while back, and it's just a ton of fun. It definitely, I mean, you've said it before, it's a bit of a lottery. Sometimes it just goes off, and it's a ton of fun when it does. But even when it doesn't go off and it kind of implodes, to me it implodes spectacularly, and that's always fun too.
Yeah, it's like someone lit a match in a dynamite factory, because no matter which way you go, it either implodes to the point where it's a spectacle, or it explodes to the point where it destroys everything else.
Yeah. I guess that's it, unless you had any parting thoughts you wanted to share with everyone listening.
Not really. I mean, the deck, I like I said, it's a ton of fun. The 2.0 version has some more green pips that will let me use Night Flight if I get those in my hand. But otherwise, it's a little more black, because I did notice that I was in certain games, I actually got really close to winning, even without the system reboots, but I couldn't punch damage through.
Yeah, your characters didn't do damage on their attacks.
Yeah, and now I have 2, 5, 7 black pip cards, so I have a little more chance of at least punching through 1 or 2 on a flip.
Yeah. Adding that up can help some of those edge cases.
Exactly.
Well, all right. Thanks, Rob. Thanks so much for sharing this with me and with everyone else. And I know we're doing this. Originally, we were trying to do it in person, but coronavirus is a thing. So I appreciate you doing it virtually with me.
Not a problem at all.
All right. Have a great day, everyone.